If watercolor has ever felt intimidating to you, this video is going to help so much. Today, I'm walking you through the essential watercolor basics every beginner should know, from flat washes and gradients to wet-on-wet techniques, layering, and more. And by the end of this video, we'll use all of these techniques together in one simple beginner-friendly painting. One of the things I love most about watercolor is that it teaches you to let go a little bit. The paint moves in unexpected ways, the water does its own thing sometimes, and honestly, that's part of what makes it beautiful. So if you're brand new to watercolor, don't worry about perfection today. We're just practicing, experimenting, and learning how the paint behaves. Let's get started. You really only need a few basic supplies to begin watercolor painting. I'm using watercolor paper. This one is by Bao Hong. It is 100% cotton. We're using round brushes. Watercolor paints, 2 jars of water. I also have this bucket that I like to use. The water is clean even though my bucket is dirty. And a paper towel, or I use a Swedish dishcloth, but paper towel works, regular jars work. One thing I always tell beginners is that watercolor paper matters more than expensive paints. Better paper allows the water to sit nicely on the surface and gives you smoother blends. And the better paper allows the pigments to show up fully, and it won't desaturate as much on the 100% cotton paper. And if your paintings ever feel frustrating, it honestly might not be you, it could just be your paper. The biggest skill in watercolor is actually learning water control. This mixture has a lot of water in it. You can see how shiny and puddly it looks on the paper. And this mixture has much less water, which creates more texture and rougher brush strokes. But usually we want something in the middle, smooth and fluid without flooding the paper. When there's too much water, you can get blooms like this where the water pushes pigment outward. And honestly, blooms can be beautiful once you learn how to use them intentionally. If you ever have too much water, just gently touch the edge with a paper towel and it'll soak up the extra moisture. Learning watercolor really is learning the relationship between the pigment, water, and timing. Now let's practice a flat wash. A flat wash is simply an even layer of color. I'm loading my brush with paint and moving steadily across the paper while keeping a small bead of water along that edge. I'm tilting that paper up as you can see, and you want to work fairly quickly so the edges stay wet and blend smoothly together. One common mistake beginners make is overworking the paint once it starts to dry, and that's usually what causes streaks or muddy areas. Another helpful tip that I have would be to make sure that you have enough paint mixed before you start doing your flat wash. That way you're not doing what I'm doing and mixing paint as you go. If you mix paint as you go like I'm doing here, it is definitely more difficult to get that even wash because it's hard to make sure that you have the same exact amount of pigment every brush stroke that you pick up. Flat washes are used constantly in watercolor for skies, backgrounds, and base layers. Next, let's do a gradient wash, also called a graded wash. I'm starting with a stronger, darker color at the top, and as I move downward, I'm slowly adding more water to my brush with each stroke that I do. This creates a smooth transition from dark to light. This technique is beautiful for sunsets, skies, water, and soft backgrounds. You can also blend between two colors for a really soft atmospheric effect. This next technique is one of the most magical parts of watercolor. For wet on wet, we apply clean water to the paper first, and then we drop paint into the damp paper and allow it to naturally spread. Notice how soft these edges become compared to painting on dry paper. This technique is perfect for loose florals, clouds, backgrounds, and dreamy soft effects. One of the hardest things for beginners is resisting the urge to keep touching the paint, which I am clearly losing that battle myself right now because I am very much overworking this watercolor, but you can see that we kind of save it towards the end. So I guess keep watching me play and discover. I don't know. Wet on dry is the opposite technique. We're applying wet paint onto dry paper. This gives us a much sharper edge and more control. I use this most often for details, stems, leaves, trees, and defining shapes. You can also practice changing your brush pressure to create different stroke shapes. Pressing harder creates thicker marks, while lighter pressure creates delicate lines. Whatever brushes that you guys have, I highly recommend doing drills like this trying to get as thin a line as possible and then as thick a line as possible, and then making it a smooth gradient between those two lines. That's just the best way to learn your brush and how it will react before you even attempt to do a final piece. One of the most important watercolor habits is allowing layers to fully dry before adding more paint. If we paint too soon, the colors can become muddy and create blooms. But once that first layer is dry, we can glaze another transparent layer over the top to build depth and richness. This transparency is one of the things that makes watercolor feel so luminous. You can also glaze different colors, or you can glaze the same color to make it a little bit more intense. So I'm doing green on green. As you can see, it increased that depth, and then the green over the brown changes the tone of that color. For dry brush texture, use very little water on your brush. The paint skips across the paper texture and creates these beautiful broken marks, which I will be demonstrating over top of these mountains here. This technique is great for grass, wood, tree bark, and expressive texture. You can get different looks with the dry brush texture by using the side of your brush versus the tip of your brush, so just play with the water control of this one and see what kind of textures and effects that you can get. And if you want to create highlights or soften areas, you can gently lift color using a clean, damp brush, or you can even just use a paper towel. Watercolor is actually more forgiving than people think. Here I will show you that lifting technique again. My brush is damp and clean, and I am just taking that brush and scrubbing it into a dried area of watercolor. I'm doing a circle, but you can do whatever shape you need. So just getting that paper nice and wet, reactivating that paint underneath, then grabbing my paper towel and lifting that color. Certain colors will stain the page more than others, so some can be lifted pretty easily and others can be a little bit of a struggle and either require more scrubbing or just won't be able to be lifted at all. For the sake of time, I am speeding up this portion of the video to 2x, so if you want to slow it down, you can put your video speed down to 0.5x and you should be good to go. But right now I am starting with a little bit of a gradient wash for that sky, taking a blue color and laying it in and just dragging that color down. Adding a little bit more water with each brush stroke that I do, and then going back in, adding more pigment at that top, and then dragging it down. Going in with a little bit of a deeper blue because apparently that was not deep enough for me. And doing that same technique while that paper is still damp, you can see that nice little sheen to the paper there. Now I'm grabbing a bit of paper towel and I crumpled it up and I'm adding some clouds by lifting out some of that blue color. Just dab it in the most random way, and it'll make it look like the most realistic clouds. Now I'm going in with a little bit of a smaller brush with a gray color to it and adding some depth to the bottom of my clouds, making them look a little bit more distant. While that bottom edge is still wet, I'm going in with a darker blue. This is ultramarine blue, and I'm adding in those distant mountains using a little bit of that wet on wet technique and letting those colors bleed into those cloudy skies behind it. Now I'm adding a little bit of gray mixture into my blue color and making those next layers of mountains in the foreground. Also the wet on wet technique, and then blending that color down to the bottom of the page. Then we are going to let that fully dry, and then I'm going back in with those same colors, and instead of keeping those mountains the wet on wet technique, I'm making that top edge a little harder, as you can see, using the wet on dry technique. So I'm going to lay in that color very softly, and then I'm going to grab some clean water and blur out that bottom line. And repeat the same thing for that foreground mountain, using wet on dry, rinsing off my brush really well, and then blurring out that bottom line to make it a gradient. We're going to let that dry one more time. Then we're going to mix up a green color, and I'm going to lay that in using that wet on dry technique, and all I'm doing is using the very tip of my brush and making a pine tree and being very loose with it because pine trees are not perfect. Just going back in with more of a green tone and defining more of that shape. Then repeating the same thing for a second tree. Last but not least, I am going in with a gray color and a fine brush and adding some birdies in the distance. Cue the satisfying tape pull. And that is all from me today. Thank you so much for being here. Let me know if you guys learned something new in this video. If you did, please leave a comment and let me know. I would love to hear from you. Hit that like button, hit that share button, share it with a friend. It really helps out the channel, and I will see you guys next time. Until then, stay creative, stay faithful, and stay rooted in grace. Bye guys.